Good morning, everyone. It's Charmaine Hammond. We're here today with an incredible conversation about the cloud. We're going to be talking about having your office mobile, and this topic really relates to nonprofit organizations, even entrepreneurs. The challenge that we saw in communities that have faced disasters, evacuations, and other kinds of emergencies was that many people had to flee or just leave their offices, and they had nothing with them. In many cases, their computers were set up where their password was recognized by like ours is with Norton Antivirus. It recognizes our passwords in our vault, and people felt really unprepared, and they felt detached from their information. And for some organizations, this can be devastating. I spoke to one organization several years ago that had experienced a flood, and of course they had to evacuate very quickly as well, and didn't have things on the cloud, and they couldn't access people that they needed to connect with. They couldn't get the resources and information to complete their AGM report and all of this. So what they now do is they're on the cloud. And today's guest, Matthew Kutu, is going to be talking about home, or sort of a mobile office, and how we can really use the cloud to help us be effective and have all of our data protected. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Matthew. He really neat guy. We're in for a really good presentation here. Matthew has a degree in journalism, and he's worked as a videographer, a video editor, and a multimedia journalist. He's passionate about the nonprofit sector, and he uses his skills to curate content and resources that really help nonprofits better understand TechSoup Canada's donation programs and how to use technology effectively. Before we get Matthew doing his presentation, I want to alert you all to the fact that on the chat box, you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a chat box. You are welcome to put your comments and questions in there. What we'll be doing is I'll be checking back and forth with Matthew after his presentation to respond to some of the questions. We also had some nonprofit organizations that couldn't join us that are going to be, I'll be asking the questions on their behalf, and they'll be watching those on the replay. So please put your questions in as we go through, and we'll get to them after the presentation, as well as your comments. And I'd be curious to see from all of you right now that are online, if you want to type in a big hello and where you're from and maybe what the weather's like. I'm in Vancouver today, and it is beautiful, although a little bit rainy, probably later today because it rains for 4 months in Vancouver in the winter. Matthew is in Ontario. So Matthew, I really wanted to welcome you to today's webinar, and thank you for coming on to talk about this really important topic.
Thank you for having me, Charmaine.
So I think we should just dive in. I can't wait. I've got my notepad here because I think I'm going to be walking away with a really big to-do list. And I want to thank Fuse Social for hosting this webinar series. Fuse Social is an organization in Fort McMurray, Alberta, Canada, who is like a backbone support organization supporting social profits in the Wood Buffalo region. And I've had the pleasure of working with Fuse Social on a number of projects, including their academic calendar, the training that they provide for social profits. And we fell in love with TechSoup, which is the company that Matthew is with. We fell in love with TechSoup when we read a report from them. It's on your chat box. And it was a report about disaster planning and recovery as it relates to technology. And after the evacuation of Fort McMurray as a result of the forest fires, Fuse Social really wanted to get information out there to the social profit sector to really help them in the recovery and rebuilding process. And TechSoup was one of the resources that we just fell in love with. Thanks again, Fuse Social, for sponsoring this webinar today. And Matthew, I'm going to let you take it away. We are all ears.
Thank you so much, Charmaine, and thank you to everyone else who's joined us today. So we're going to be talking about the mobile office, protecting your data with cloud computing. And really what we're going to get into today is an understanding of what cloud computing really is. We're also going to talk about some of the conventional technologies that you're all familiar with in your general office life. And then we're going to compare them with cloud computing alternatives and talk about how we can transition to those cloud services in order to be able to access our office resources, our data, our programs, our files, all those things through the internet. And at the end, we're also going to discuss some of the pros and cons that come along with cloud computing, so that when you or your organization makes that transition, you know what to look out for. But just before we get into that, I also want to have a chance to introduce my organization, TechSoup Canada. So as Charmaine said, my name is Matthew Couto. I'm the communications coordinator. And with TechSoup Canada, our mission is to help other nonprofits use technology effectively. And we do this in two ways. The first way is through our technology donations program. So we partner with companies like Microsoft, Adobe, or Symantec, and we offer their software or maybe hardware products at a discount or an outright donation to other nonprofits, charities, and libraries across Canada. So just for an example, Microsoft Office Professional is generally around $500 in the open market. But for nonprofits, charities, and libraries who qualify for the Microsoft Donations Program, they can get Microsoft Office Professional through TechSoup Canada for only around $55. So as you can see, the price savings can be quite significant, especially when you're purchasing software licenses for your entire staff team. And being a member of TechSoup Canada is free, so you can head over to techsoupcanada.ca/getting_started for more information on that. As well, at TechSoup Canada, and this is a lot to do with my role, is we curate and create nonprofit tech resources. So we have a blog, we are active on social media, we host events and webinars just like this one, to help nonprofits really understand the ins and outs of technology and get them on board so that they can both work more efficiently and reinvest time and energy and resources into what counts, and that's their impact and their mission. So now let's dive into the topic today, cloud computing. So what really is cloud computing? Well, the dictionary definition is the practice of using a network of remote servers hosted on the internet to store, manage, and process data rather than using a local server or a personal computer. So in other words, instead of you using your own computer to connect to a server in your office space, you're actually connecting to a server that's located elsewhere, and you're connecting through the internet. So that's the main difference with cloud computing. It's the data is stored externally from your office, and it's accessed remotely through the internet. And really what's happening is that companies are providing cloud storage as a service. So you're paying them money in a monthly or yearly subscription, and they're supplying the infrastructure and the connection for you to be able to store and access your data at all times through that service. So that's really kind of the bare bones of cloud computing. Now, the technology of cloud computing has sort of been made possible over the last few years through large investments in infrastructure. So companies like Google and Microsoft, for example, started building data centers around the late 2000s. And so when they started to launch their cloud suites in the early 2010s, they had the infrastructure in place and they were prepared to start offering their services to users in a public sense. So when I talk about data centers, I'm talking about really large industrial buildings operated by these companies that are filled with servers and have immense storage capacities. So there are, for example, a company like Microsoft has over 100 data centers. Within these data centers, there are hundreds of rows, and within each of these rows are hundreds of servers. So really you get a sense of the immense scale of the storage capacity that these companies have. And when you sign up with a company like Microsoft, you gain access to a part of one of these servers to store your data. And the information goes between that server, through the internet, to your computer, and back. And that's how it's facilitated. And so as long as you have internet access, you have access to your files. So just to break it down, as I said before, we're going to look at some of the technologies present in our everyday lives and the cloud computing equivalent, so you can kind of see how the mobile office can be created. So I'm just going to run through this chart for you. So obviously in a conventional office, we have office programs. So we have suites like Microsoft Office to open, edit files like documents, spreadsheets, PowerPoints, things like that. As well, we have shared and secured file storage through our internal server or any other means. We have our personal or professional calendars to keep track of our commitments and help coordinate time with others. And of course, we have our email addresses which is a professional form of internet communication. We also have contact information so that the people that we need to get in touch with, we are able to. And then we also have constituent relationship management systems or databases where we can host all the different bits of information about our membership, about partner organizations, whatever it may be. So we have it in one central location at our fingertips, and we're able to get the information we need when we're making different decisions through our work. As well, when we need to speak to multiple people at the same time, we need to make conference calls and connect to multiple parties. And another great option, which can be an individual or conference call, are video calls, which is essentially just speaking with the added benefit of having a camera. And that just cuts down those communication barriers, gets us a little closer to face-to-face communication by being able to read each other's body language. And of course, we need an office phone line. So that's a lot of different lists of technology in a conventional office. And if you look over the right, there are about 4 types of cloud computing services that cover all those areas and form what's called the mobile office. So cloud suites are sort of the bread and butter, and they have office programs built in. So with cloud suites, you can create those files, you can share them, you can edit them, whatnot. You also have the ability to store on those external servers that I mentioned before through cloud suites. You also have coordinated calendars, emails, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to run through these one by one and just give you a sense of how these cloud services can sort of recreate your office space digitally through the internet. So as I mentioned, cloud suites help you create, share, and work on documents. But one of the beautiful things they do is help you collaborate by allowing you to work on these files simultaneously. So with cloud suites, you can actually open, let's say, a document. I can share it with 4 other colleagues that are working on the same report. And the 5 of us can all edit, write, and comment on our work simultaneously. So someone can be writing one paragraph in the document, and right below, I'm writing a different paragraph, while someone else is making a comment on what's being written. And this is all in real time. So this is another benefit of cloud computing with cloud suites, in which you have that sort of ability to collaborate and feed off each other's work in real time, rather than making an edit, sending it over on an email, having that person look it over, sending it back. It's all happening in the moment, and it's going to save you a lot of time and hassle. With cloud suites, you can also control who can view, comment, or edit your files. So you can really have a lot of control over the permissions. So let's say your organization has certain files that can't be viewed by your general employees. That's sort of sensitive only to senior management. Well, you can manage your files and your permissions in a way that people who don't have permission to see those files are restricted to do so, all within the same file structure. So it's just a very convenient way to do so. You can do it on a folder basis or per file basis. And it's very streamlined, very intuitive and easy. As well with cloud suites, the calendars you can make publicly available or available just to your certain staff members. So if I'm trying to schedule a meeting with a colleague to run over a project we're working on just in a face-to-face capacity, instead of having to send her an email or go to her desk and bug her and say, hey, are you free at 2 p.m. tomorrow? I can actually go into our cloud suite, look up at her calendar, and I can see a list of all her commitments for that week. So I can see whether or not she's available in that afternoon. And then I can send her an invite through the calendar, and she'll either accept or decline. Again, just a very streamlined process to coordinate with colleagues or other external professionals. So great examples of cloud suites are Google for nonprofits, Microsoft Office 365 for nonprofits. There are also a lot of other really, really high quality cloud suites, but the reason why I'm only listing these 2 today are because through TechSoup Canada, qualified nonprofits can actually get access to these cloud suites for free. So I felt no point listing other options when 2 really, really great options are available at no cost to nonprofits, charities, and libraries in Canada who qualify for a program. So just a little food for thought there. The next one we're going to talk about are CRMs. And I do want to point out that CRMs really are just as robust as any desktop CRM. But the real benefit you're going to get from cloud CRMs are sort of mobility and ease of access. So because all this data is being hosted in the internet, it's accessible to you at any time, anywhere that you have internet connection. So if you're working from home remotely one day, you can have access to this information without a hitch. The other thing that cloud CRMs allow are integration options with other software. So because different cloud programs are all hosted on the internet, it allows for them to actually talk and connect to each other almost as if they're the same program. So for example, if I have a cloud CRM that's hosting all my information about my membership, and I also use an email marketing tool like MailChimp to send emails to my members, if someone signs up for my program and they enter their information into my CRM, the two programs will actually talk and integrate so that that information is then copied over into MailChimp and is automatically added to my mailing list. So what that means is when someone signs up for my program, I don't have to manually make note of that, take that information and re-enter it in MailChimp. I'm confident that through this automation process, my email list is always up to date and it's always clean because it's playing off the information that people give me in real time. So those are some of the ways that cloud CRMs really have a leg up over traditional CRM systems. So great examples of cloud CRMs: Salesforce, Civi CRM, which we use at TechSoup Canada. Neon CRM is a great option, and of course, Donor Perfect. The next one we're going to talk about are electronic communications channels, otherwise known as video conferencing or messaging tools. And really what it boils down to is that these platforms really streamline your communication by organizing it. Yes, you can communicate with anyone you want through email, but I'm going to just outline some certain features of e-communications channels that you just can't get with email. So the first is you're able actually to create and organize different threads. And what I mean by a thread is essentially a series of conversations back and forth. So if I email someone and they respond, and then I respond back, and then they respond back, and sort of we start this conversation online, that's what's considered a thread. So I can actually create as many threads as I want that are relevant to my work. So if I, again, work at a project with 2 other colleagues, I can create a thread specifically for that project. So then I know that anything that I need to talk about, any ideas I need to shoot out to my colleagues relevant to that project, I know it's all going to be found in this one thread rather than have it being mixed up in a single thread. So if there are multiple projects going on at the same time, and I'm talking about all these different things all in the same thread, I'm going to have to scroll back through our conversation history and try to find the little points that are relevant to what I'm trying to do now. But if all those different conversations have their own place on these channels, it makes it a lot easier to organize the information. And this is especially pertinent with nonprofit workers because, as you all know, especially with smaller nonprofits, we tend to wear a lot of hats and balance a lot of different roles. And when you're able to organize the conversations you have with other people in this manner, it takes the burden off your shoulder in terms of compartmentalizing the different conversations. It really just does that for you, streamlines the process, and helps you have more effective communication. The other thing that's great about these tools is that you can make quick video calls. So in any thread that I have, I can, if ever the conversation gets too complicated or a little too deep for text messaging, I can actually start a video call instantaneously and get face-to-face communication with my colleagues or the other people I'm working with. So this is just another way that you can, the whole thing is streamlined, so everything you need is just in one spot, and it just makes for simpler, easier communication. So great examples of e-communications channels or video conferencing and messaging tools are Fleep, Bitrix 24, WhatsApp, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and Slack, which we use at TechSoup Canada. So next I'm going to talk about VoIP, which is also referred to as VoIP. And what it stands for is Voice over Internet Protocol. And essentially what this is a cloud service that hosts phone calls over the internet. So with VoIP, it's no different really than any traditional phone system. You get to make and receive calls in the same manner. But the real benefit is that VoIP phone systems are cheaper than traditional phone systems. And besides the fact that VoIP rates tend to be lower in general, they also, because it's hosted over the internet, it helps to reduce and sometimes even eliminate long distance charges. You also, with VoIP, generally don't have to pay for extra features like caller ID or call waiting, which traditional phone systems will charge you extra for. These features all come in a package deal. But the real beauty of VoIP is that you're able to move or mirror your phone lines to different locations. So let me explain what I mean by that. In terms of mirroring a phone line, I can actually have one VoIP phone in my office and a second VoIP phone at home. And I can have those two phones connect to the same line. So if anyone ever calls my office line and I'm at home, I can still receive that call or make calls from that same line so that people will, on their caller ID, will see that it's me calling. But I can also move it. So let's say I'm taking a week at the cottage as a sort of vacation, but I need to do some work remotely because there's certain things that are time sensitive that I just can't let wait. I can actually use my VoIP phone to reroute my extension to my cottage landline. So if anyone calls me at my office while I'm at my cottage, that call will be redirected and my cottage phone will ring and I'll be able to pick it up and speak with them. So that's just another way that you have that flexibility with your phone system through VoIP. I can even reroute it to a cell phone. So if I have to leave my office for an hour to go to some event, for example, I can be confident that if someone calls me at my office that I'll still be able to take that call. So again, you just have so much flexibility with voice over internet protocol phones. Now, that being said, I do want to talk specifically about some of the drawbacks of VoIP. And as with any cloud computing service, if you don't have internet connection, you're sort of out of luck. Things aren't going to work. So with VoIP, if your internet fails or stutters, you're going to drop calls. So this is a service that we don't recommend for nonprofits that don't have a stable internet connection, especially for nonprofits in rural locations where internet tends to be a little more unstable. Also, this is something we do not recommend for any nonprofits that are running a helpline or a crisis line. So if you're speaking to clients who are in serious situations and you just can't afford to allow those calls to drop because the consequences are more severe than just inconvenience, then we do not recommend VoIP phones. So we actually have a bonus category that I didn't mention before, but is really important to talk about. But before I get into that, I do want to mention some options for VoIP. So Broad Connect Telecom, Versature, One VoIP, and RingCentral are all great companies. So our bonus, as I mentioned before, are project management tools. Now, project management tools are really just help us keep our work coordinated and organized based on different deadlines or the different projects that we may have. So for example, I can use a project management tool to create and assign different tasks to myself or my colleagues and set due dates for them, include any relevant information in that task. And so it's just a way to help keep on top of my work, because if a deadline approaches, my project management tool will actually send me a notification via email telling me that, oh, you have this task due, you need to get on it, it's due tomorrow. It's such that extra level of a reminder that helps you keep on top of your work. Again, especially for nonprofit workers who are wearing multiple hats and balancing multiple projects. So for example, with TechSoup Canada, we use a project management tool called Asana. And we sort of have this, this rule that if you don't put a task into Asana, you assume it's not going to get done. And really one of the big situations, and this happens, I'm sure, to everyone, is you are sent an email, and that email has a certain follow-up. And you think, oh, I can't get to that right now, but I'll follow up later. So maybe you mark that email as unread, so you notice it at a future time, but something else comes up, it slips your mind, and you get a second email from that person saying, so did you get it done? That can be an embarrassing situation because you let that, that task fall through the cracks. So what we do is whenever we get an email like that or anything else comes up, even if we don't have time to get to it right away, the first thing we do is we throw it into Asana, we create a due date, we assign it to someone, and so that we know for sure that we're going to be on top of that. And one of the beautiful things too with project management tools is that I can actually follow tasks that aren't assigned to me. So if I assign a task to a colleague saying, edit this report, and I can follow that so that when she finishes editing the report and she marks that task as complete, I'll also get a notification telling me so that I don't have to bug my colleague following up with her saying, did you get it done? Did you get it done? I instantly know whether or not it's done. And it just, again, helps streamline that communication. I can also attach files to tasks. So if I assign this task to a colleague to edit this report, and she doesn't have to then go through our files and search for the report that I'm talking about, I can attach it to the task so she can just download it and get to work. It's all there, it's all streamlined, and it really does just produce more consistent, organized work in the long run. And we've really just had it's really augmented our ability to work using these project management tools at TechSoup Canada. Some great examples are Zoho Projects, Freedcamp, Trello, and as I mentioned, Asana. So now we're going to get into the pros and cons of cloud computing. And before I dive into this, I do want to sort of call out that one of the big concerns that a lot of nonprofits have with cloud computing is security, privacy, and access. And I really do understand where a lot of these organizations are coming from because there's a certain psychological component. It really does feel safer to have your data stored in your own space, under your own roof and in sight. But the truth is that cloud computing is much safer than any other solution to date. And I'm going to actually read you a quote. You see the end of that quote there up there on the screen, but I'm going to give you the whole thing. Many nonprofits believe on-premises systems offer more privacy and security because the hardware is physically located at the organization. Yet, IT and data security are certainly not the expertise of nonprofits. In fact, by utilizing the investment of major cloud providers who accumulate the greatest collection of computer science and data security expertise in the world, nonprofits can benefit from levels of privacy and security that far exceed what their on-premise solutions can offer. So really, the bottom line is that when we talk about cloud computing, when it comes to companies like Microsoft and Google, these are multi-billion-dollar companies that have state-of-the-art systems in place to secure your data. And they do it exponentially better than what nonprofits can do themselves. And just to give you some examples, now just to be perfectly transparent, this is information I'm collecting from Google and their security measures. But Google has strong digital security, so they have state-of-the-art encryption, of course, but they also have employees that sort of quote-unquote patrol the servers and look for hacking attempts. So if anyone does try to break into a server at a Google data center, their employees are actually going to be able to spot it and react to it. So that's another level of security that nonprofits generally don't have. The other thing is not only do they have cameras and 24-hour, 7-day-a-week security patrol to physically guard your data, but they also have state-of-the-art security systems in place to get access to the actual servers. So for example, you need a proper security clearance in your security card, but But they have iris scanners that scan your eye and make sure that you are who you're saying you are to gain access to the servers. So no one gets inside these data centers who isn't a trusted employee of Google or these other companies. They also don't put all your eggs in their baskets. They spread your data across multiple centers. So whenever you upload data to a cloud service, they're actually copying and storing exact copies of that data in multiple locations. So that if anything happens to one center or one server, your data is still safe because it exists elsewhere. It's really a precaution, but that's just another way that they really ensure that your data is going to be protected. As well, they have security systems. So if there's a fire at one of these data centers and the whole thing burns down, your data is going to be safe, because the second that the alarm system goes off, your data again is backed up, replicated, and stored somewhere else. And also the point of access to that data is changed. So you could be working on your cloud suite, accessing your files, and a data center that has your information could become damaged, and you wouldn't even notice. All your data would still be there and accessible to you. And the other thing, this is again a bit of a bonus, but cloud storage systems are actually also more environmentally friendly, because think about all the energy and electricity that's being used to power servers across the nation. So there's all these different individual servers being powered at different organizations, but they tend not to be used in entirety, right? You might use 30, maybe 50% of the storage capacity of that one server, but you're still using all the same amount of electricity to keep it running. With cloud providers, with cloud suites, cloud storage, they actually, if your data only fills up half of a server, they'll take another client and fill up the other half with their data. So that way they're able to optimize the storage. And so all the energy that's being put into running these servers is serving the most amount of people. And through that efficiency, we're actually lowering electricity consumption and helping out with our environment. So the verdict is, yes, you may feel safe with an internal server at your organization in your office building, but the truth is it's less safe. And one of the biggest risks is just the server failing from old age or going through some other malfunction. Even if you have your data replicated on another server at a different building, but it's in the same city, it's still at risk, as we've talked about with the disaster that unfortunately happened in Fort McMurray. If you had a server in two locations and they both were affected by the fire, you're still at risk of losing your data. So with the cloud, it takes all that risk away. It puts all the burden of managing and backing up and securing your files on the shoulders of the service providers like Google and Microsoft, and off your shoulders so that you can focus on your mission. The other great thing, and I've touched on this before, the other great thing with cloud computing is the mobility and the flexibility. And this is partly what we're all here today, right? We're talking about the mobile office. So when you're on the cloud, your data is always accessible through any device, whether it be a phone, a tablet, a laptop, or desktop. Doesn't matter. If you have internet access, you have access to your files. You have access to everything you need to do your work. It gives you the flexibility to travel and work, and all these different things. So it really does just put all the control into your hands and give you all that access at your fingertips. It also allows for great integration options, like I mentioned before. And what you can also do is sort of use cloud computing to focus your information into a central hub. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. So if I have a cloud CRM, like Civi CRM, for example, that is hosting my client data, and then I also might have a program like Eventbrite that's managing my events. And then I have a second CRM like Salesforce that I have as my central hub. So if anyone signs up through my website for my organization, their information is then inputted into Civi CRM, which then copies that information into Salesforce. But then at the same time, if I run an event through Eventbrite and people are signing up for my newsletter, for example, through Eventbrite, that information is also being copied to Salesforce. So what this allows in the end is you to go into one program, one central hub like Salesforce, and be confident that the information there is accurate and reflects multiple aspects of your organization, whether it be events, email marketing, or your general membership. And that's another way you can really streamline your work and have it all there available in one spot. Now we're going to talk about some of the cons. So again, as I mentioned before, no internet, no access. So one of the things you have to be conscious about when it comes to cloud computing is, do you have stable internet? But also, do you have a high enough bandwidth? Because the more cloud programs you have running, the more bandwidth it's going to be required to keep them all happy. And there are going to be associated costs with that increased bandwidth. And more dependency on internet connection. So that's something to consider. So one of the solutions that we talk about quite a bit is what's called the hybrid cloud. And really what the hybrid cloud is you're balancing between a use of an internal server and cloud computing. And there are two big benefits to the hybrid cloud. The first is to sort of address the issue of unstable internet. So for example, you can have an internal server with all your data, all the information that you need, and you can have a complete copy of that on the cloud and work through the cloud for most of your day-to-day work. But if anything does happen with your internet connection, you're not cut off, because that you can then switch to that internal server to access the information that you need. So the hybrid cloud provides that flexibility between the internet and internal access, so that you have all the benefits of the cloud, but if you run into bad internet, you have a fallback. The other thing that the hybrid cloud addresses is funding restrictions in terms of data storage. So as many of you are probably familiar with, there are a lot of strict laws in Canada surrounding data storage. Specifically, if you're getting provincial funding from British Columbia or Nova Scotia, or even other funders, often that funding stipulates that any information you collect through the funded programming has to be stored on Canadian soil. And the thing with cloud computing is these data centers that you're going to be storing your data onto are generally hosted in the United States of America. So that creates a restriction for a lot of organizations who want to use the cloud because they're not confident that it'll be on Canadian soil. Now, there are solutions to this. Companies have caught in whiff of these restrictions. So Microsoft, for example, has started building data centers on Canadian soil. So you do have that option to apply and notify Microsoft that you want to use their cloud computing, but you want it to be in Canadian soil. There's that option. But what other organizations will also start to use is third-party providers. So independent companies, third-party companies in Canada that are just other options to store on Canadian soil. And I just want to talk about, give you a few tips when it comes to addressing these companies, because a lot of these third-party providers aren't the most professional, and you want to make sure that if you're storing your data with a third-party company, you want to make sure they're reputable. So some tips: do your research. When you're looking at these companies, make sure you know the reputation, you know what you're getting yourself into. Make sure that they're fully insured, so that if there's any issues, whether it's financially or legally, that you are protected and their issue doesn't become yours. Also, make sure that these companies are ISO certified. So the ISO is the International Organization for Standardization, and it's an international body that creates great standards in many industry areas, including data storage. And really, any company that doesn't have an ISO certification, that should be a red flag for you, that they're not doing things properly and that using their services might put your nonprofit at risk. The other thing to really keep in mind is that, believe it or not, when you store data in the cloud on the servers of third-party companies, often they're going to make the claim that now that data belongs to them. So what you need to do is, when you draft up these contracts and these business agreements, you need to make sure that you have it in writing, spelt out black and white, that you're the one that owns the data that you're storing, and that you know exactly where your data is going. And I don't mean just that it's going somewhere in Canada. I mean, you know the address and the coordinates of that exact location of that exact data center that your data is going to be stored at. So again, these are measures just to clear the air, make things black and white, and they're going to help protect your nonprofit legally down the road if ever an issue does come up. The other thing to consider is that when we talk about, sorry, let me just take a quick step back here. So the other thing I actually wanted to, just to get more into the hybrid cloud and continue what we were talking about there. So we have a great resource on our website, and it's called "What is the Hybrid Cloud and How Can It Help My Organization?" And it's a great article that really just fleshes out this idea in better detail and gets you a sense of really how it covers all these different pros and cons, and is really the most sort of foolproof solution for secure storage and shared storage access. The other thing I want to point out is a program called OwnCloud, which you can access at owncloud.org. And OwnCloud isn't a cloud computing platform, but rather it's an interface that lets you access internal servers as if they are on the cloud. So what I mean is that if you're using Google for Nonprofits, for example, you're going to start to get used to the interface that Google uses, that very user-friendly, very clean, clear user face. But if you're going to switch to your internal server in your hybrid cloud solution, OwnCloud lets you have an equally clean interface so that if you do have to switch from the cloud to your internal server, it's going to be a similar experience. And this just really helps with the consistency of your access in your work, especially if new employees are on board and this is the first time that they're accessing your internal server. They're not going to have to completely relearn how to access the different files. It's going to be on a very familiar interface. So that's the bread and butter of it. Really, what I want to sort of hammer home is the simplicity of it. I know a lot of nonprofits, they learn about cloud computing, they read about cloud computing, and they think of it as a very, very overwhelming, complex process. But really, at the end of the day, getting your nonprofit onto the cloud is as simple as adopting these cloud services that I've outlined as a way to replace conventional technologies in your office. So if you sign up your nonprofit for a cloud suite and you get a VoIP service and a cloud CRM, and you get an e-communications channel and a project management tool, just these 5 different cloud programs, that's all it takes. Voila, your nonprofit is already taking advantage of the power of cloud computing. It's really that simple. And the flexibility and the benefits you get from cloud computing, they outweigh the drawbacks. And especially for nonprofits, small nonprofits that don't have a dedicated IT person, that don't have a whole lot of resources or data security expertise to call upon, it makes sense to go to the cloud because you're getting access to this technology and this expertise at an affordable rate. Often it's free for nonprofits. And it just takes that headache and that burden off your shoulders, and it puts it in the hands of these IT professionals that can do a better job than you can. And that lets you, again, really refocus that energy and effort to what really counts, and that's the work you're doing with your nonprofit and day-to-day to impact your communities and make this a better world. So thank you. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me today and learning about the cloud, and I really hope that this has kind of cleared things for you and gives you a better perspective about how to get started. And now we're going to have a moment to ask some questions and get more clarity and more information about this topic.
Wow, Matthew, woohoo! That was phenomenal content. So I have an awful lot of information written down of to-dos.
Go
The
for it.
to-do. Thank you, Matthew, for the very big to-do list. Great content, and you know, technology is not my genius. It's really not my genius. So you just did a fantastic job of teaching us really technical information in a way that was so interesting for me, and I got it.
I'm glad.
That was a
the
big
goal.
win. So we had some questions coming up, Matthew. The first one is Jackie says, I'm using Dropbox. Is this cloud computing? And then the second part of the question is, I also use iCloud and Google Docs. Would love to have one system.
Yes, so all those services you mentioned, they're all cloud computing because they're all hosted and accessible on the internet. So if you're trying to get it all in one system, you're actually already half the way there. So if you're using Google Docs, you're actually, without even knowing it, you're using Google's cloud suite. So what Google actually has is what's called Google Drive, and that's their sort of file storage equivalent. So that's really a similar platform to Dropbox. So you can upload files, you can share them with others. So if you want to have those functionalities all in one place, you can do that. You can use Google services. So you log into your Gmail account. There's a menu up in the top right corner. It looks like 9 little squares all in a row, and all in like a larger square. And you drop that down, and you have access to those services. So Google Drive is the equivalent to Dropbox, and you can access your documents, share them with others, and upload files. And so that's a great way to have a central location.
That's great, and I'm loving the question you raised, Jackie, because I also use Google Docs, and I'm working on 2 massive projects right now, Matthew, where we have a number of different players. So one of them is we're planning a Global Influence Summit in Florida. So we have an amazing team together that are all working on different drafts. And the reason I love Google Docs is because I don't have 9,000 versions of website copy. All of us can probably relate to typing something up in Word, and somebody forgets to relabel it or set the settings to update it automatically. And then you never know which draft you're working from. And I have spent over the years so much wasted time fixing that exact problem. So I love Google Docs. The one thing I learned is I blew my own document away. That's how, when I say technology, Matthew. So I had a really important document. The good news was, because I love to do things twice, I also had it in a Word document, most of it. It was about 80% of it. And then we uploaded it to Google Drive, but I somehow blew it away. So is it important for us when we're working on the G Drive to actually download those documents that we never want to lose and save a copy of them? Because I think, is it true that with Google Docs that if you blow it away, it's kind of gone forever? Is that correct?
Yeah, so I mean, if you have only one copy of a file that's on Google Drive and you remove it and confirm it, because it always gives you the option to undo if anything slips, then yes, unfortunately that there are ways to recover it, but the chances are that that file is gone. So I do, for files that I'm working on actively in the moment, I do have a copy of it on my computer as well. But generally when I'm done with it, I upload the final draft to the drive, and that's the end of it. But it's never, you can never have too many backups. That's really the bottom line. You can never be too safe, because it's just a very small step to copy something into another folder on Google Drive, or to download and keep a copy on your desktop. It's such a simple thing that can save you so much hassle down the line if anything does come up.
Yeah, that's so true.
And that's another thing too. You can keep, you don't have to necessarily download it onto your computer. You can keep the copies of the same file in 2 different locations on your drive. And that's an equally safe measure to backing it up.
Oh, that's a great idea. I hadn't even thought of that. I was just automatically thinking, to the computer. So thank you for that. I have more homework now. And this is a great question. And I really hope I'm saying your name right. Katina, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but this was a great question.
I think you got it.
What about Google employees seeing nonprofit client data? and that came up when you were talking about sort of how the storage happens from the Google. Google.
That's a great question. So Google's own policies is that they handle, they store the data, but they don't access it. So they're not snooping in. They're not looking at what the data actually contains. Their main concern is its safety and its security. So, I mean, they take the files, they encrypt it, they place it on their servers, but they're not going into the data at all. And I mean, there also becomes the issue of special requests for access that may come from legal entities or different organizations. I mean, that turns into a bit of a gray area, but for the most part, you can have absolute confidence that these companies, reputable companies like Google, are not snooping into your data at all.
That's a great question, great response. Yeah. One of the questions came up from a social profit organization that couldn't be here live today, but they're going to be listening later. They were asking about when you're working on a project management type platform, you mentioned Asana, and I think they were mentioning, I think it was Basecamp and Trello. Yeah. Basecamp and Trello that they've used for projects. And they were wondering if you had a tip around making sure that when you got all these people involved in the project, should there be some kind of a system where if somebody was to leave or move to another job, that they're immediately removed from that so that they don't keep getting access? The one organization had said that they didn't have somebody who was sort of responsible for making sure that their project management had integrity, I guess you could say. And so they had a person leave and was still checking everything. The person was no longer an employee of the organization, but continued kind of going on and checking the status. Yeah, and then someone noticed that because they were still commenting, but they're no longer an employee. So if that were sensitive information, that could really be a big breach. So do you have an easy system for that organizations could use?
Definitely. So there are ways to sort of remove users, but I think what it also boils down to is within the user access in these different platforms, there are different levels, and generally it depends on the different lingo of the program, but tends to be that admin or administrator access is sort of the highest level. So people with admin access sort of can do whatever they want on the platform. So really, it's making sure that the more trusted employees, the right people, are the ones who have that access. And there are ways. It's different with each platform, but you can actually remove accounts, close them down, and restrict access going forward. So I would just you do want to make a point of that they are removed. Like it would depend on the platform to give specific examples. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so it's really important, I guess, for organizations when they're starting with some kind of platform like this to make sure that everyone who's going to be using it is trained, understands, so that accidents don't happen and people get access to information that they shouldn't. Absolutely. And I guess that's where those policies become really important for the nonprofits, is creating really good policies and procedures around the protection of their data, who gets access to what. Is that something that TechSoup Canada has resources on or can support nonprofits as they build their sort of cloud computing programs?
Yeah, definitely. Just off the top of my head, we have a great resource on how to tackle technology projects. And we created this partnering with a great IT consulting firm, 365. And one of the things they talk about that relates to what you just mentioned is what's called a BYOD policy, or which stands for Bring Your Own Device. So that's when we talk about cloud computing and having all this access and mobility with all your staff. You're right. There comes a risk that your data, your files, your information is being accessed on computers that you necessarily don't own or control. So BYOD policies are a great way to sort of outline, like similar to what I said when it comes to third-party cloud storage. You really outline that you as the organization owns the data, that you have rights to access that data. So if an employee is using a company email address, you should have it in writing that you have the right to go into that email account and read their emails. Now, to be clear, this isn't something that's used willy-nilly, right? Managers aren't just snooping around their employees. But this is just a measure that if there's conflict or this issue arises and your organization needs access to this, that you have that access. And also, great policy practices are to make sure that if an employee is working remotely, that they're always logging out of their cloud accounts when they're finished working, so that if their computer is lost or stolen, that those accounts won't be compromised. And as well, they really shouldn't be storing company data directly on their computer hard drive. And there are ways to as well remotely wipe different devices. So if you do happen to have sensitive data on your phone, for example, which you shouldn't in the first place, but if you do, again, there are ways to sort of to wipe and clear that data as a way to protect it from getting into the wrong hands. So these different policies, these different practices are great to outline as a standard, a standard form when new employees come on board. So there's that resource on our website.
Fantastic. We'll make sure that we put those links in the follow-up.
Definitely.
And the last question that came in, Matthew, was an interesting one from a social profit. They were really excited to start looking at the possibility of how they can store some information on the cloud. And one of their challenges was they had a major event that they were working on that was going to be happening just around the time that people got back to the community after an evacuation. So everything, all those files and contacts and sponsor agreements, all of that was, in someone's computer that they couldn't access because they weren't allowed in the community, of course, with the evacuation. And then they also had their AGM and their year end. So all this was going on for them at the time that they were evacuated, of course, not knowing how long they're going to be away from their office. And the question was, can you just use it to back up certain things? So their question was, could you use the cloud to maybe have copies of your AGM report, your last 3 years of financials, and some of your sponsor agreements, those kind of agreements that might need to be accessed, even if there was a computer or internet failure in a community for 3 or 4 days. Would that be wise for organizations to look at doing something like that?
Absolutely. I would say that there's no right or wrong answer. You can use the cloud and cloud computing to any way that fits your organization. And so in this instance, if they want to work off their own solution for most of the time with other files, but specific things like you mentioned, like the AGM report, if they want to have safe backups on the cloud, totally go for it. There's no harm. Even if you upload it and that's it, you don't look at your cloud computing platform for another year, still there may come that day where you thank yourself that you did that, and you have that backup solution. So yeah, even if you want to use it in that sense, you don't want to use it in your day-to-day work, but just as a solution to store and back up files, that's perfectly fine.
Fantastic.
That's a great practice, yeah.
And I really recommend on the chat box here, folks, we have a link to a great report from TechSoup around disaster planning and recovery. So please make sure that you go to TechSoup.ca, or sorry, is it TechSoup.ca? Did I just say that wrong?
TechSoupCanada.ca.
Canada. TechSoupCanada.ca. I've got the link in the chat box, and I'll put it again in the follow-up, because that report was so powerful, Matthew, in just outlining every step that organizations and businesses, this applies to entrepreneurs and businesses as well, can do to protect their data in the event that they're out of their office for 2 days, or their holiday somehow gets extended because they can't get home and they're missing important data. So it's not just in natural disasters, it's in other kind of situations where we can't get to our data for a period of time. So fantastic report. And Matthew, I just want to thank you so much for coming on today to share this information and making technology so exciting.
Thank you, Charmaine. Thanks for being here and hosting. I'm glad. I'm really glad. That's technology tends to be a dry subject area, but it doesn't have to be. Really, I think when you look past the sort of the dredgy details and get to the heart of what technology is about, and that's about working more efficiently and being able to do things that weren't possible before. When you get into the exciting new possibilities in that sort of horizon, that's when it starts to get exciting. Well,
I loved what you said as you were pulling your presentation together, and you talked about letting technology not get in the way of you doing your passion, your vision, your mission, and serving the world. So I just loved how you ended that with that. And I just want to thank you, everybody who's come on today, who's also listening to the replay later. The video will be available so that you can listen to it, stop it, watch the slides, and put things into practice. And again, I want to give a big shout out to Fuse Social. Their website is fusesocial.ca. They are so passionate about helping organizations be sustainable, be successful, build innovation, and building capacity into the important work they do in serving the public and the communities that they live and work in. Thank you so much again, Matthew. It was great to be with you.
Thank you, Charmaine. Take
Thank
care, everyone.
you. Bye, everyone.
Bye now.
It's Charmaine Hammond. We're ringing off.